Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku was the reincarnation of legendary samurai? If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The day was meant to be enjoyable. Nothing negative was anticipated. Why wasn't a hero there sooner? Izuku Midoriya, who was only a little child, woke up smiling and full of energy. He had the entire day to celebrate his 5th birthday with his mother after a villain attack broke the water supply close to his school. He wasn't thinking about how his quirk hadn't come out yet for the first time in months. Rather, he was simply thrilled to be able to accompany his mother to work. At the Tokyo Museum, where she worked as a greeter and tour guide for school field trips, Inko Midoriya's little eccentricity of attracting small objects kept the exhibits tidy without upsetting the delicate artifacts on display. Although it wasn't the most glamorous job, she enjoyed watching the children's expressions of amazement and wonder as they witnessed things they couldn't see anywhere else. Inko had long, straight green hair and was a slender woman. She was attractive and had a habit of moving with unexpected grace because she spent so much time with her best friend, Mitsuki. If anyone pointed it out, she would blush. But it shouldn't have come as a surprise because Mitsuki was a model, and part of her job was to look elegant and composed, even though she was as savage and foul-mouthed off-camera as a sailor. In contrast, Izuku had his mother's hair color and his father's curls. Both Midoriyas were proud of the man, but they also missed him. It had been a wonderful man, Tetsuken Midoriya. Tetsuken had consoled Inko after his brother, Hisashi, had cheated on her during high school, and their love had blossomed that day. Tetsuken entered law enforcement, while Hisashi went into business and fled to the United States after being accused of corporate wrongdoing and embezzlement. He used to make jokes about how his iron jaw wasn't ideal for hero work, but as a police officer, it allowed him to take a real bite out of crime. He never advanced very far in the force, but he didn't just watch helplessly as the heroes were occupied with other matters. Tetsuken died with honor after saving a group of children from a building that was collapsing. Izuku's perspective on the world slightly shifted after that day. Even though he still loved All Might, the symbol of peace, and his favorite hero, he would always say that his father was his favorite. Katsuki Bakugo was the only child who didn't make fun of him for it. Izuku's best friend, Kachin, was Mitsuki's son. Katsuki respected Tetsuken for dying the way he did and for always making his auntie smile the way he did, a smile that both boys missed, even though he disagreed with Izuku's insistence that Tetsuken was the greatest hero ever. Before leaving to give his mother a good morning hug and eat his birthday breakfast, Izuku completed putting on his favorite All Might t-shirt and shorts. They didn't have much time before Inko had to leave to catch the train to work, so it wasn't too drastic, but it was pleasant. Another peaceful morning spent with each other. If only they were aware of how long it would take them to have another. The Midoriyas were greeted by Katsuki and his father, Masaru, who was quiet but seemed to have endless patience, when they got to the train station. The children quickly bumped fists and grinned as soon as their gazes locked. Katsuki said, "Happy birthday, Zu-chan. Any sign of your quirk yet?" With a little growl of laughter. Izuku grumbled with sadness, "No, but I heard that sometimes really strong quirks take a while, and I'ma need a really good one to keep up with you and your explosion." Izuku nodded, and the two of them headed over to the adults, oblivious to the anxious expression in Masaru's eyes. Katsuki sneered but gave his best friend a noogie, saying, "Damn straight. We're gonna be the best heroes ever. We should get back to Auntie and my old man. Otherwise we might miss the train." It took them several hours to get to Tokyo, and because it was so early, both children eventually dozed off against Inko's sides. The Tokyo Museum had expanded significantly over the years and now featured both more recent exhibits and artifacts from the far past. The Hall of Hero and Villain's Vault were two of those new features. The museum firmly believed that history should never be forgotten, regardless of how it was received. The first was hailed, while the second caused some controversy. Izuku and Katsuki were practically jumping with joy as they ascended the stairs. Izuku had visited the museum a few times, but this was Katsuki's first visit. The Greenette wanted to give him the whole tour, just like his mother did for other children. Inko released them after receiving assurances from both children that they would exercise caution and a reminder that Katsuki was not permitted to use his quirk at all due to the possibility of injury or damage. Izuku persuaded Katsuki to wait even though they both knew they wanted to see the hero exhibits. Izuku would show his best friend the other interesting things that were available while they saved the best for last. Izuku began by introducing Katsuki to some of the dinosaur exhibits, which he found impressive. After all, what young boy wouldn't be in awe of the skeletal remains of a roaring T-Rex? Even hero nerds like them had to concede that it was cool, even though it wasn't always the case. The armor and weaponry of the Meiji, Edo, and Sengoku periods came next. The two talked about any potential ideas they could utilize when they too became heroes after Izuku highlighted the factors that inspired Yoroi Musha, the number 5 hero. The swords made Izuku's heart skip a beat, while Katsuki was especially intrigued by the black powder cannons. He was drawn to them, but Katsuki kept him moving and his mother's repeated warnings not to touch the artifacts caused him to be pushed away before the pull could become too great. Although it wasn't frequently visited, the next area was crucial. It contained artifacts from the 2 world wars, a time of significant devastation as well as further modernization. They were surrounded by images and fragments of aircraft, anti-aircraft weapons, enormous warships, and the destruction caused by the bombs that left the area in ruins. In a sense, they were surrounded by pictures of immense power and pride as well as immense sadness and shame. This was the world before quirks, and they were somewhat relieved that it was all over. On to a brighter section, they discovered the exhibit showing the start of the quirked age, the age of heroes, a glowing infant in the arms of an anonymous mother. The light baby of Ching Ching City, China was a tale they had heard several times in school. The first quirk to be registered. Images of other oddball kids were shown beyond it, followed by the first waves of villains and vigilantes who arose to use these new abilities for their own benefit or to defend their neighbors, and finally, the first heroes. Vigilantes are rewarded for their hard work and even better deeds with legal status. 2 distinct areas were accessed through these displays. The Hall of Heroes is bright and welcoming on the right, while the villain's vault is gloomy, frigid, and menacing on the left. The boys heard screaming and loud cracks before they could get into either area. Izuku quickly hid behind Katsuki, but neither of them fled. Instead, they began to flee, scurrying from one big display to another in search of shelter as they looked for their parents or the source of the situation. They were terrified, but they aspired to be heroes like All Might, who saved people rather than fleeing and hiding. Both kids froze in fear at what they discovered. Masaru was shouting at one of the men, "I told you, Mask. I changed my mind, I'm not going to be a part of this. Take your guys and get out of here. The heroes are already on the way, and if you don't you won't get anything but a trip to Tartarus." While Inko and a few other adults were being held captive in the feudal area by at least 15 men wearing improvised clothing and some brandishing guns. "It's too late for that now, Mossy, but for being a coward and betraying your brothers, I think it's time you receive your severance pay." Mask grinned and pulled back his other arm, turning it into a blade before plunging it into Masaru's chest and watching as the light left his eyes before throwing him into a display that broke and shattered glass all over the floor. Mask then turned to face his hostages. He reached for one of the teenage temps who had volunteered, but Inko slapped his hand away as he stood erect and glared at him, saying, "You will not touch her with your dirty blood-stained hands. Looky here boys, we found a pretty one. Too bad she's nothing but a stupid bitch." Mask chuckled as he handed Inko across the room and across the face with his regular hand. "Nobody else needs to get hurt. Just give up the keys to the displays and we'll take what we're here for. Man's gotta eat and this trash will sell well on the black market." Mask and his men began to giggle as well as Inko, as well. "You stupid alley trash, most of the stuff on display is fake. They're cheap counterfeits made for display. The real ones aren't even stored here anymore for this exact reason. You killed a man over dime store fakes not worth the price of admission to anyone else." Mask frowned and swore, his face falling. "You're lying. We didn't waste the last 3 months for crap," he yelled, stomping toward Inko with his blade raised to strike. Inko closed her eyes as he lowered his blade arm. Her final thoughts were a frantic cry for Izuku to be okay, but the suffering never materialized. Instead, she saw her baby boy standing in front of her, defensively, his arms out to further protect her, and heard a familiar scream of pain. He was still standing, blood trickling down his body and collecting at his feet, but all she could see was his back. Mask kicked the boy away, causing him to slump carelessly on the floor close to the display he had broken earlier, and she froze. Earlier, Inko's world was as broken as glass, and all she could do was wait for her turn to join the boys she loved most in the next world. But Izuku was not yet dead. The pull came back even though his body was in excruciating pain and a chill had already begun to spread throughout his limbs. A spotless katana was sitting in front of him, and it beckoned. Izuku grabbed the handle with all of his remaining strength, and he felt his body start to burn with renewed vigor. He didn't even feel it, but the slash across his chest smoked, sealed, and scarred as he started to rise without anyone else noticing. Rather, he experienced a surge of knowledge and a fresh hunger. Izuku took a single step in a stance he was unfamiliar with, drawing the blade and slipping into a trance. The only thing that anyone else witnessed was Mosk's arm descending and then falling further until it was severed on the ground. The young child, whom everyone had assumed was dead, turned on his heel, twisted the blade in his hand, and then appeared to vanish once more. They saw Mask slump as his head rolled away from the stump of his neck, but then he reappeared, standing protectively in front of his mother once more. The villains saw only the hard golden eyes of death when they gazed into what had once been two emerald orbs of innocent childlikeness. 10 minutes later, the heroes found 22 corpses and terrified but unharmed civilians. They felt the heavy bloodlust escaping the final unguarded room, and they froze, racing to save as many people as they could. The heroes discovered a 5-year-old boy with a new scar that stretched from his shoulder to his hip, a katana that was too large for his small frame in his hand, and the frayed remnants of a t-shirt that was soaked in blood and barely holding together when the group's leader finally forced forward enough to throw open the door. The boy was covered in blood from head to toe, and even his green hair was beginning to turn red. More than anything, though, even as the last goon sat and pleaded for his life, it was his empty gold eyes that held them captive and filled with the certainty of death should they approach. The boy only needed to take one step to move out of front of the man. He was a step behind him instead. The goon's head fell away, a fountain of blood erupted behind the boy, and Yoroi Musha and 2 of his sidekicks watched. Yoroi Musha, unsure of what the devil was happening, stepped forward to stop the boy. The hero would not have been able to stop the slash that struck him if it weren't for his years of training. He was so unprepared for it that he failed to notice the subsequent slash that pierced his black Herculean armor. The hero stumbled and fell to the side, but it wasn't powerful enough to pierce all the way through. His sidekicks had ample opportunity to use their own blades because the boy appeared almost perplexed that he was not releasing a wash of crimson spray. The boy appeared to regain consciousness at the last second, but not quickly enough to completely flee unharmed. The boy had a cross-shaped scar on his cheek, and when Yoroi Musha saw him next, his eyes glowed like an animal spotting a fresh danger. A 5-year-old boy appeared to dance and sway around his student's strikes, and the hero had to watch until the boy flickered once more and the sidekicks fell. Yoroi Musha stood up and saw the boy grab one of the abandoned blades and move it into his mouth. The paramedics arrived to find Yoroi Musha on his knees, panting and bleeding from a dozen slashes, his armor shattered and discarded, covered in deep scars, and an unconscious 5-year-old lying in the middle of the room, appearing as though his last action had been struggling to reach 3 broken blades scattered around the room. Yoroi Musha pushed the paramedics to check on his sidekicks through his tired gasps. When they informed him that they would require surgery but were in stable condition, he appeared to exhale with relief. Yoroi Musha cautiously carried the boy who, just moments before, he believed might be his last while the paramedics handled the transportation of his sidekicks. Let him go. Zhu-chan isn't a villain. He protected Auntie, he protected all of us. You can't have him, exclaimed a blonde child with piercing red eyes as she ran toward him and beat on his leg. Yoroi Musha simply continued to move. Other than containing the thing he had just fought, he didn't know or care about anything else. Kami had no idea how many more bodies would be added to his record if it woke up and attacked once more. The boy was put in a pair of tiny quirk-canceling handcuffs, and the hero stayed by his side the entire way to the police station. Even in the empty cell that Yoroi Musha insisted they put him in, he never left his sight. He began delivering his first report to Chief Saragame, whose dog-like face became increasingly terrified of what he was hearing, believing that it was now safe. They didn't go to investigate until they heard sobbing and cries of terror, and then the monster had vanished. It was replaced by a green-eyed boy who appeared utterly terrified and perplexed by his surroundings. His eyes glowed with wonder and happiness as he stammered, "Yoroi Musha-san, oh thank Kami. I don't know where I am, and I hurt all over, and I want my mama." The boy started sobbing uncontrollably, letting out all the emotions inside his tiny body as he pleaded with them to assist him in finding his mother. Yoroi Musha was unfazed, but Saragame appeared utterly devastated, seeing only a wounded puppy. He wasn't going to take any chances, but he wasn't sure if it was an act or the cuffs. He took Saragame by the shoulder and led the chief outside, ignoring the boy's increasing whimpering and pleading as the hero just turned to leave. The following 10 minutes were spent by Yoroi Musha. Stood in front of the door, blocking anyone's path. The boy didn't move or let anyone inside until he appeared to be crying himself to sleep. While the boy was being cleaned up, he insisted on the use of sedatives and almost attacked a nurse who was about to take off the handcuffs. The shouting started as soon as Mitsuki, Inko, and Katsuki arrived at the precinct, which took them almost 2 hours. When the chief and number 5 hero refused to let go of Izuku, Inko began to cry, and Mitsuki became enraged. To little effect, the blonde threatened the pair with news stories, lawsuits, and worse. They were eventually told they could see him at his court date after being forcibly removed from the precinct. However, a week later, there was an incident when they attempted to move Izuku to a group holding cell. 3 days after the handcuffs were taken off, Izuku had been nothing more than a kind, naive youngster. One of the men attempted to use a steel shiv on another man. Only one of the 6 men survived the altercation, and it ended up in Izuku's hands. He had been the target of the shiv at first, and he managed to survive by hiding in the corner until the monster collapsed from exhaustion. Izuku was taken back to a private cell, to put it mildly. Inko and the Bakugo family were waiting to see Izuku again, even if it was in a kangaroo court, in a courtroom 1 month after the attack on the museum. Izuku had a slightly different appearance when he was brought in. His hair had grown a bit longer, and blonde and red streaks were starting to show. They were almost devastated by the tired, sunken look in his green eyes. The bailiff read the charges, which included 28 counts of homicide, destruction of historical artifacts, illegal quirk use, and attempted murder of 3 heroes. The judge appeared a little uneasy. The jury's disgust and horror were directed at the 5-year-old who was trembling in his seat, not at the police. They initially believed that Izuku could escape punishment because the majority of the charges were related to his first quirk awakening, but Yoroi Musha testified and described the monster he had witnessed. He only made it through one because his small frame wasn't suitable for the actions his quirk was directing him to take. The group cell footage followed, and the court saw nothing but a monster disguised as a young boy. Fortunately, it was illegal for them to send him to Tartarus. For Kami's sake, Izuku was 5. However, that did not guarantee his freedom. Instead, Izuku was placed under remand indefinitely, or at least until he could demonstrate that he was no longer a threat to society as a whole, at a high-security facility for individuals with deadly or uncontrollable eccentricities. After being given a few minutes to say their goodbyes, Izuku's family was made to watch him being dragged away. Izuku's next 10 years were a living hell. A week after his sentencing, a government physician visited his cell room to assess his quirk. Steel Soul turned out to be an intriguing quirk. It taught him the fundamentals of 3 different fighting techniques that they thought would eventually combine to form a single, deadly whole, and it put him into a battle trance that turned him into a deadly weapon when he came into contact with any type of blade. Although the HPSC was secretly ecstatic about this discovery, thinking they had discovered a new asset, they were forced to give up after 2 years of encouragement. They couldn't control him. They found that wooden swords kept him from completely entering the trance, but in any case, he just refused to carry out their orders and kill. Only the genuinely nice ones were spared that fate and were merely ignored. In fact, he had a tendency to kill his handles more frequently than their intended victims. Ultimately, they labeled him a failure and moved him to a different institution, letting the previous one burn down and hiding their involvement. The guards of Izuku's new home then beat him, spat at him, and treated him like a villain for the next 8 years, but they didn't notice one aspect of his quirk: it had given him a will of iron. They hammered it with their cruelty until it was steel, and they fired iron in the boy's inner rage. All Izuku did was wait. He studied, trained, and persevered because he knew that one day he would be free once more, at which point he would demonstrate to everyone that his blades were designed to defend the defenseless and destroy those who mistreat them. He was Duskwalker, the Batuse, the Green Demon, and Izuku Midoriya. He would go by many names in this world, and one day he would emerge as the greatest hero in history. The Center for the Uncontrollable, also known as the Armory in the Shadows, was a heartbreaking sight for Shota Aizawa, who had witnessed some genuinely horrible things during his years as a hero. Owned privately and operated covertly by the HSPC, it walked the line between legality and extra money, so the sporadic incidents that crossed that line were never reported. He appeared to be a clean, well-adjusted member of society, despite the fact that some of the people inside thought he looked like a hobo. Nimari Kayama, the hero Midnight and one of his closest friends, was standing next to him. They were cautioned that they might disturb the patients if they were dressed as heroes, so neither was. Accordingly, Shota wore a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and a leather jacket he borrowed from his husband, while Nimari, dressed in a pencil skirt and dark blouse, looked like a secretary or lawyer. The armory's interior resembled an abandoned asylum from a horror film. Flickering lights, white, aged, cracked walls, and patients imprisoned behind steel doors. In order to keep any blood or odor from sticking, they bleached everything every 30 minutes, which made it uncomfortable and unsettlingly sterile. After an unexpectedly lengthy walk, they came to a windowless door that was barred and reinforced like a wild rhino. As Nimari helped Aizawa up, the guard hit a button on the wall, saying, "Wake up you fucking villain trash. Your new handlers are here to transfer you to your new cage." The next thing they knew, a heavy slam struck the door, and the guard retreated, saying, "Fucking monster is your problem now. Scoop him up and let's go. I got more important things to do than sit around here." Aizawa rolled his eyes and opened the door to discover a padded, completely dark room. He wouldn't be able to see anything if it weren't for the hallway light. Izuku Midoriya, their goal was to sit and stare at him from the floor. In addition to the single large scar that appeared to almost cut him in half, he was shirtless, exposing a multitude of smaller scars across his chest. Two bright emeralds gazed at him with a mixture of hope and hatred in the shadow of the room and his now long red, wheat brown, and evergreen hair. The boy slowly rose to his 5 feet 10 inches height and turned around, assuming a position that seemed to have been trained into him to make applying cuffs as easy as possible. Nimari felt sick at the act, but Aizawa just scowled and gently put on the cuffs. From this angle, Aizawa saw something that surprised him. Izuku's back was immaculate, despite the fact that his chest was covered in scars. However, he didn't have time to look because the team started guided them out, walking slowly enough to give the impression that he wasn't in control. The boy was obviously undernourished and physically exhausted. Aizawa could sense the tone of his wrists where he was holding on to the boy, but that didn't make sense. In addition, the pants that protected his decency were old and torn, just tattered shorts that were stained, but the boy didn't even seem to notice. Other patients moved away from the boy as they walked, and the guards appeared to look at him with scorn and disgust, but again, the boy never responded. This went on for the duration of the transfer procedure until the doors leading outside opened, at which point the boy hissed in agony and appeared to take a step back. Nimari wanted to cry, wondering if it had really been that long since this child had been allowed to see the sun. To make matters worse, one of the guards laughed before taking out a heavy bag hood from a drawer and saying, "Here, use this. No one needs to see that monster's unsightly mug, so it's probably better anyhow." With a gentle smile, Nimari took the hood and blocked the light with her body, whispering, "It's okay, sweetie. Wearing this thing is humiliating, and I know it hurts, but you'll be safe soon." Nimari felt sick to do this, but she put on the hood, making him appear like a prisoner or a kidnapped victim. "Just endure it a little longer." Izuku gave her a look that was full of confusion and flashes of trust before nodding once and lowering his head. Walking barefoot and blind wasn't comforting, but it did give him a sense to rely on because the bag muffled his hearing and smelled musty enough to block his sense of smell. After that, Izuku let the stern man and kind lady guide him. They didn't feel hostile to him or like they wanted to manipulate him, unlike those suits growing up. He needed to find out who sent them someday so he could bring them down. "Don't worry, sweetie. Our boss made sure this thing has all the bells and whistles, including a secondary set of tinted windows that can be put up for particularly bright days, or people with light sensitivity," Izuku said, as a feminine hand cupped his cheek. Izuku felt the world around him shudder, then the sensation of movement. After a few minutes later, there was a mechanical whirring sound, and the hood was removed. Izuku slammed his eyes shut, expecting more blinding pain from the light, but it never materialized. "I now need your voice to confirm the following section. Izuku Midoriya, are you?" Izuku Midoriya, the demon child. "Yes, that I am," Izuku said, taking a deep breath and opening his eyes to meet the woman's sympathetic, worried gaze. The woman cocked her head. "All right. I'm Nimari Kayama, also known as Midnight, the adult-rated hero. Although it's good to meet you, your speech pattern seems a little strange. Are you okay?" Izuku smirked and scoffed, saying, "I'm afraid I am what I am. I believe it's a peculiar side effect of my quirk, but it doesn't happen frequently." It might be brain damage, Nem, the man growled. I wouldn't doubt it given the shitshow we just left, the man snarled. I wish I could arrest them all and set them on fire, but fuck, I detest bureaucracy. Invite me along if you do, Izuku said, laughing at that. It sounds good to see those jerks forced to view the world from behind bars. Nimari chuckled, be careful Sho, don't want to corrupt the cinnamon roll, or his mom's gonna be pissed. Izuku tensed up, saying, you know my mother. Sighing, Aizawa said, well done, Nem. He softened his voice slightly and said, yes, problem child, we've met Inko and the rest of your family. You're almost as loud-mouthed as Zashi. They never gave up trying to win you back, though I'm not sure if you'll believe me. I can tell you intend to escape, he said in a harsher tone. There are some things we need to discuss when we get where we're going, but our boss wants to help you and part of that is reuniting you with them. Perhaps shatter the handcuffs and struggle until you are able to kick open the door. Don't, please, I don't think you'll believe us. I can't blame you after everything you've been through, and we haven't earned it, but one more chance. Please give us one last chance to avoid making a mess. I was naive once, Izuku said, frowning and turning away after giving it some thought. You're both heroes, that much I can tell, and that fact alone makes me not want to trust you. This seemed to surprise Nimari but not Aizawa. I thought that everyone was protected by heroes, but then my quirk came to life. I'm not ashamed of what I did, but I'm also not proud of it. In cold blood, they killed my uncle and almost killed my mother. Their deaths are merely regrettable. I am not a monster, but in this instance, the punishment matched the crime. I'm not a bad guy. As a child, I was unruly and overpowered by my peculiarity. Even though I wasn't acting voluntarily, I was placed in a cage, prodded, beaten, starved, and kept in the dark. Give me one reason to stay since I've already been betrayed so many times. Nimari appeared on the verge of tears, but Aizawa inhaled deeply and pressed a button on the steering wheel. A moment later, Izuku heard a voice he thought he would never hear again, Aizawa-kun. Is there a problem? Tell me you have my baby boy, please. I can't let him down again, please. Izuku broke down in tears and whimpered, Mama. Is that you, Mama? After a brief pause, Inko broke the silence by sobbing herself and saying, Izuku, my baby. I'm really sorry. I apologize for taking so long to figure out how to set you free. Although this isn't how I had hoped, at least I get to see you once more. I have so much to tell you, and I've missed you terribly. I know you want to do all this now, but you're going to have to wait, Midoriya-san, Aizawa said, stopping Inko. We are currently en route to the campus. When he's located, we'll call you, but be ready, he's not in good health. But keep in mind that I promised you something, and I plan to see it through. Across the line, Mitsuki's voice snarled, you'd better hoboman. Your boss appears to be the most reliable of the snakes we've dealt with, which makes the brat and I unhappy. You'll regret it if you don't bring our boy home. Izuku sniffed and then grinned slightly as the call came to an end. Compelling argument, you win. Izuku then let Nimari dry his face with his hands still bound behind him, and he sat back to meditate, knowing that this would have to be sufficient because he wouldn't be able to relax enough to sleep. Nimari just kept watching the boy, and her heart ached, until she realized that he wasn't even wearing shoes. She could see the strength in him, but she wondered, at what cost? It was inconvenient, but Izuku had come to terms with the fact that he was playing along for at least a little longer because he wanted to see his mom and it would be foolish to become a fugitive first if he didn't have to. Nimari looked guilty as she held up the hood again and explained that he would have to wear it again until they got inside. Their boss could then lower the light level to make it only slightly annoying and gradually dial it up to normal as his body adjusted. After a few minutes, they were far enough away from the windows for Nimari to remove the hood, and Izuku blinked his eyes. Izuku felt like he was being watched, but he ignored it. He snorted when he heard what sounded like girls gasping as they led him inside, and he couldn't help but flex a little to put on a show. Nimari saw him and giggled, but Aizawa just growled, and whoever was nearby dispersed. When Izuku saw the telltale signs, classrooms, uniformed students, those sterile hallways that every school had, he could see the eyes now. Students peered out of rooms to see the inmate, so Izuku gave them what they wanted, and he let out a growl and a portion of his bloodlust. Both heroes were instantly on edge, but Izuku simply scoffed and resumed his walk, ignoring the students he had just terrified to death. When Izuku arrived at a pair of double doors, he surprised his escorts once more by slamming his foot into the frame between them, causing both doors to fly open in front of him. As Izuku entered, he was greeted by a sitting man wearing a fedora and duster who appeared shocked, as well as a small white-furred creature wearing a vest and shoes who appeared totally unfazed. "It is nice to make your acquaintance, Midoriya-kun," the creature said after a brief silence. "Would you please take those cuffs off, Kayama-kun?" Nimari nodded and followed instructions, saying, "I would like our newest addition to be as comfortable as possible." Izuku flexed his wrists, then went to a chair and sat down, his eyes never leaving the new pair. The animal grinned and clapped his paws, saying, "Splendid. I don't mind if you call me Principal Nezu or Nezu-san. Warden must also be employed, but that seems really awful." Izuku actually laughed at that, saying, "Yes, I do recall hearing about you prior to being imprisoned. Isn't it the world's smartest creature? It's almost comical. In the same room, everyone views the man as little more than a wild beast, and the beast is smarter than any man. That does sound like the start of a bad joke." The other three in the room went pale, but Nezu laughed and said, "I like you." Izuku sighed. "If the stories are true, we have a lot in common, since we were treated as little more than rats in a cage." "Quite," Nezu said, nodding. "I am familiar with that expression in your eyes. You experience the same hunger, anger, and desire to destroy everything." With a long, satisfied sigh, Izuku said, "And piss on the ashes." "That I do, but that's not what I'm going to do." Then, Nezu leaned forward curiously. "What will you do?" "I will do as I was always meant to," Izuku said, scratching the lengthy scar on his chest. "I'll break those who need to be broken and protect those I can. I'm not a monster. I'm not a crazy animal. I am no longer the unruly kid, and above all, I will never again be put in a cage." "I knew you would say that." Nezu pulled out a piece of paper and pushed it toward Izuku, saying, "Sign this, and you'll be the newest applicant to UA's heroic program next semester." The bloodlust that came off Izuku this time was 10 times thicker and 100 times more potent than before, making everyone but Nezu tremble for a moment. In fact, his smile grew. Nezu shot him a savage glance and said, "Think of this as an alliance. Sign this, and I will throw all the weight of my position behind you. Together, your strength and my intellect will ensure that no one must endure the torment we endured. I'll sharpen your blade so you can aim it at the throats of those who hurt us." After reading the paper, Izuku turned to face Nezu and said, "I have conditions." "I'd be shocked if you didn't," Nezu grinned. "What are you thinking of?" The other adults appeared worried, but Nezu nodded, understanding. "According to this form, I am to be a ward of UA, Izuku sighed. "I am not your attack dog, and if you try to make me one, I'll treat you the same way I did the suits that tried it when I was little. Although this is not intolerable, I insist on seeing my family on a somewhat regular basis, if her schedule permits." And Nezu kept nodding. "It was always the plan. I want you to be a part of each other's lives, but it won't be every day. I need an actual living space. Running water, power, light, and a healthy food allowance," Izuku said, taking a breath and shifting his jaw, obviously tense. "Although having internet access would be nice, it won't be a deal breaker, and I can decorate my new house however I like." "Do you really think I'll try to put you in a third-rate kennel?" Nezu asked, tilting his head. Izuku snarled, "I spent the remainder of my sentence shackled to a hospital bed and subjected to rigorous physical and quirk testing for more than a week. Animal trainers would have been more accurate," Izuku said with a dark laugh. "Then they tried to assign me handlers. Over the following 2 years, they were responsible for the majority of my other scars, but they were unable to shatter me. They got theirs, though," he said with a broad smile. "They persisted in attempting to have me kill for them, and I did, but it was never the intended victim." When Izuku closed his eyes, he said, "Eventually they finally got the message though, and abandoned me to the hell hole you found me in. I believe I did my best because I left the people who didn't try to beat me into submission alive." "You mean they've had you there since you were 7? Roared Aizawa as he leapt to his feet. "I was thrown out like trash," Izuku said, nodding. However, the guards believed that taking control would be enjoyable. Izuku gazed into Aizawa's eyes and said, "I haven't taken a bath in 8 years. They believed that using a hose to power wash me was more effective. I was fed erratically. I occasionally went more than a week without receiving anything. My cell was visible to you. There was a light that broke during my first week there and was never fixed. Those cells weren't designed for comfort, and I never had a bed, pillow, or blanket. The padding on the walls retained heat during the hottest summer months, and there was no insulation against the cold. I was only permitted to leave my cell when they claimed to be able to smell me through the door, so I lived in complete darkness. There was never any success in getting other patients to fight or kill me. What do you mean, Midoriya-san? Said the pale-looking man in the fedora, who had remained silent up until this point. Izuku frowned and said, I made sure to send the third guy back with an offer. I wouldn't do more harm than was absolutely required. They could be healed fairly quickly and painlessly, but it would be small enough to put them down. They would be my eyes in return. They would teach me what I needed to know and learn the things I couldn't. The system wasn't too bad. Ironically, the guards threw them in almost, lights out, and they would come back in the morning to check on my survival. They never stayed to observe, apparently because there is a detective with a truth quirk. They reasoned that this would allow them to claim they saw nothing. To get right to the point, the majority of the individuals there are intelligent. They were sent there because they were unable to control their eccentricities, but I assisted many of them and most of them were able to figure it out in time. With a head tilt, Nezu said, you assisted them. I've always loved quirks, so I analyzed them as a way to stay sane, Izuku said, sitting back and closing his eyes. Sometimes they had what they needed, and it was as easy as a minor miscommunication about how their quirk operated. Others needed real labor. A girl I met had a peculiarity that caused her to have panic attacks even though she could gradually absorb all the oxygen in a bubble surrounding her. She would become trapped until she passed out and her quirk deactivated, and panic attacks caused the quirk to go out of control, frequently killing anyone else inside her bubble. I gave her meditation lessons. After I helped her to calm down, all she had to do was figure out how to turn it back off. She was among the more compassionate people I encountered. I used to joke that she must be beautiful because she left so many people speechless, even though I don't know her name or how she looked. Nimari snorted, and Nezu laughed, I see, while Aizawa and the man in the fedora moaned. Sweet and dark at the same time. To ascertain your academic placement, I will need to administer a few tests to you. Considering that you haven't received any official education since your incarceration, you are obviously smarter than I anticipated. I thought I would have to run a scholastic boot camp for the next 10 months, but that might not be required. Regarding your request, it has been fulfilled. I can't give you a blank check, mind you, but you can have anything you need as long as it's within reason. You will always be able to present your case if something is in doubt. Izuku winced and said, that didn't go so well the last time I tried. Nezu shrugged, acknowledging his point. Izuku remained silent for a minute, as if he was thinking, and then he sighed, saying, I can't think of anything else at the moment, but I have to ask. You no doubt intend to have me train my quirk. What are you thinking of? That is a difficult question to answer, Nezu said, putting his paws together. We still need to run those academic tests and evaluate your physical and mental health. After that is finished, I plan to work with you, Aizawa, our nurse recovery girl, and myself to create a schedule that will meet all of your needs and prepare you for our entrance exam. You and I both know that doing otherwise would be the height of irresponsibility. I understand, Izuku said, nodding, but why Aizawa? He's a hero, I can tell, most likely underground. Other than experience, which you surely possess more of, what does he contribute to the conversation? I'm the one put in charge of you primarily, Aizawa said, frowning without appearing offended. I am best suited to shut you down if you lose control because my quirk enables me to turn off any quirk I see, with the exception of mutations. Do you have sword training? Izuku asked, cocking his head. With a glare, Aizawa said, no, but I do have training with a knife. Izuku hummed, parkour and stealth. Then, I assume you're quick. Mostly, Aizawa said, his lip quivering in annoyance. Although I'm not the fastest. Not fast enough. Izuku stepped back and slowly made his way back to his seat. That is something you're going to have to prepare for, he said, appearing beside Aizawa with his hand in a chopping position next to the hero's throat. I don't mean to hurt anyone, but if I lose control, I doubt anyone will be able to stop me without killing me. In the event that it comes to that, I want you to put me down right away. I'm not being a martyr here. I simply want that on the record because I am the only one who truly knows the extent of the harm I could cause. No more cages. My life is at stake if I lose control. I'm not interested in turning into a monster. Surely it's not that bad, Nimari said, blinking. Izuku snarled, as I stand right now, I have no blade of any kind, so I can only use about 1% of my abilities. Izuku put his hand back in the chop position in front of him, and they saw his arm flicker as if it had just reappeared next to him. The enormous marble table they were seated at suddenly broke into 2 neat pieces. Reaching down, Izuku used one hand to lift one of the halves and move it off to the side as if it weighed nothing. I call that Zero Sword style. It's my answer to those who think I am ever unarmed. As I said, it's a drop in the bucket, but as a final resort, I believe it more than suffices, that it does. Izuku signed the document and walked back to his seat before glaring at Nezu and saying, "Don't betray me, Principal Nezu. I want to trust you, that I do, but I don't have it in me to be disappointed again." Nezu nodded. "Thank you, I will do my best. Kayama-san, could you escort Midoriya-kun to one of the unoccupied teacher's apartments? I believe it should suffice until we can build you a more permanent room. I'll find you some clothes too. Can't have you running around naked on us. I don't know if some of the girls could control themselves if they saw this much beef free for the taking," Nimari said, nodding and grinning at Izuku before leading him away. With a head tilt, Izuku said, I don't follow. "Thank you for the help though. That was terrifying," said the detective in the fedora as they left the room. "The question is, did he lie at any point, Tsukauchi?" Nezu said thoughtfully before turning to face the man. The cop nodded. "I can tell he's hiding things, but every word he said rang true. It's disgusting and heartbreaking, but I would have been embarrassed to admit it before, but that kid scares me." "I see. Don't worry, detective, I'll protect you. After all, we have so much work to do." Nezu laughed evilly and drank his tea, causing Tsukauchi to perspire. How could he have forgotten that Nezu was equally terrifying? They were strolling silently with Izuku and Nimari. They made a stop at the teacher's lounge en route to the staff apartments. Izuku was left to lean against the wall and resist the urge as Nimari briefly slipped inside. He was able to run. He might vanish and no one would be able to find him, but he can't go just yet. Izuku scoffed, "Fucking rat has me curious. I know he's playing me. I'm not sure he knows how to do anything else anymore, but I feel a kinship with him that I haven't felt in a long time." Fuck. Nimari was pleasant. Aizawa was honest with him, and Nezu. Nimari, looking proud of herself, handed over a pair of black heart-shaped sunglasses as the door opened and she stepped out. Izuku couldn't help but feel reassured by the woman's presence. He watched her as they continued their silent stroll. Even though no one came near them, she made it a point to occasionally wink or smile. She was obviously popular, and Izuku could understand why. Nimari reached an apartment door and looked at her phone before entering a passcode to open it. Izuku was overwhelmed when it opened. He adored the simple, everyday apartment, which had a few rooms down a single hallway, a tiny kitchen, a sitting area, and a tiny balcony. He took a few steps inside and felt the softness of the couch's upholstery as he ran a hand over it. Nimari hugged him and whispered in his ear, "It's okay, Izuku. You're safe now. Auntie Nem has you, and I won't let anyone hurt you like that ever again." He began to tremble, but then he felt soft, warm arms wrap around him, and one of his fears began to rise. However, Nimari let him go after a while, winking, and said, "Why not go take a shower? I find nothing feels better than warm water and being clean again after a long mission. Let it wash away everything weighing you down, and melt away the stress you had to endure. You'll thank me after." Izuku nodded, and after being informed of its location, he undressed and had his first proper shower since the incident at the museum. Inside, he discovered some inexpensive but pleasant-smelling soaps, and he followed Nomori's instructions as best he could. When he stepped outside, he had to acknowledge that she had been correct. Some tensions wouldn't go away so quickly, and some old aches wouldn't go away. He did feel a little better and fresher. Izuku discovered a bag of clothing hanging on the door's exterior, so he took it inside and changed. The child took a 3-hour shower, which Nimari hadn't anticipated, but she couldn't really blame him and it gave her plenty of time to gather her thoughts. She eventually heard the door open and close once more, but she remained on the couch and waited. Nimari grinned when the boy came back after a short while. He looked like he was about to work out because he was only wearing a black muscle shirt and black cotton gym shorts, but it was still a huge improvement over his previous appearance. Additionally, his hair was much longer when it was neatly combed. Izuku, who was blushing and appeared somewhat sheepish, said, "CA, can you help me with this? My head feels really heavy with all this hair, and I've never cut my own hair before." Izuku nodded and began searching for a look he thought he might like. Nimari laughed and gave him her phone. Find a style you like, and I'll track down some scissors. Full disclosure, I haven't done this since my second year of high school, so don't expect anything too complicated. Nimari was embarrassed when Izuku's short curls turned out to be a choppy mess, but Izuku loved it. Nimari was instantly enamored with the teenager when she noticed a radiant smile on his face for the first time since they first met. Although she was aware that she had already pledged to keep him safe, she now realized she was fully committed. When she referred to herself as Auntie Nem, she had been kidding, but if he would allow it, she would now make it a reality. They then talked about getting something to eat, and Nimari insisted she wouldn't be cooking. She had only recently met the child, and even she had to acknowledge that her previous attempt was more akin to a war crime than real food. Izuku, on the other hand, hadn't been in a kitchen in 10 years and didn't want to take the chance of using a kitchen knife to activate his quirk. Ultimately, they placed an order for delivery after Nimari displayed a menu on her phone. The evening was enjoyable, the atmosphere remained mostly positive even when Aizawa stopped by to see how they were doing. Both adults eventually had to depart, and to their astonishment, Izuku bid Nimari farewell with an embrace. A brief glimpse of the child hidden beneath years of trauma and psychological abuse was sweet and innocent. Izuku felt incredibly alone after they left, and the space seemed much smaller. Izuku went to his new bedroom, took a deep breath to slow his heartbeat, and took off the comforter. Izuku wrapped the blanket around himself and walked to the balcony door. He began to fall asleep after curling up in the corner with a view of the outside. The moon and sparkling stars were the last things he saw, and they brought him a sense of calm that he had almost forgotten. Nimari and Aizawa went to check on Izuku the following morning, but he wasn't in the apartment. They were both terrified that he had finally made the decision to flee, but Nezu called to reassure them that he was still on campus. They went to Gym Omega as instructed by their boss, and they were astounded. Izuku was lifting an absurd amount of weight with one of the weight machines made for strong strength quirks. His focus changed as he approached the teenager, but he continued working out. What's wrong? Did the media find out I was here? Izuku asked, perplexed by the worried expressions on their faces. While Aizawa blinked, Nimari sighed, saying, "You scared us, kiddo. We thought you ran away." Izuku laughed. Thought about it. Would have been easy, to be honest, but not yet. I still have things to do here. Aizawa raised her eyebrows. How are you doing that? Those weights are in metric tons. Only strength quirks should be able to lift those. Izuku gave him a disappointed look. Do you know why prison inmates sometimes come out buffer than when they went in? Time. Nothing but time. It's the only thing you have on the other side. Sleeping leaves you vulnerable. I lived in darkness, so even if I had a book I couldn't have read it. I trained. Sit-ups, push-ups, jogging circles in my cell for hours. The guy in the cell next to mine called himself Newton. He could increase the gravity on anything within a certain distance of himself as long as he knew where it was. My reputation kept him safe, and in exchange, he used his quirk on me, on my request. Training has a lot more of an impact when you have someone who can make 160 pounds feel like 320, 480, or 1,600 pounds. He capped out around 16 tons though. It got a bit exhausting for him and he started getting nosebleeds, so he never went higher. This equipment is a nice alternative. Do you know if there's anything heavier though? I give it about 3 months before I max this one out. Aizawa looked like she was blue screening at the blushed. That, okay, wow. I almost feel bad for your future partner. Speaking of which, you identify male, I've noticed. Any idea where you fall on that spectrum? You don't have to say if it makes you uncomfortable, but I was just wondering. Like, I'm not particularly picky gender-wise, and prefer a connection over anything else. Meanwhile this grump is surprisingly gay. I lost 6,000 yen because of it. I was sure he was a furry given how much he loves cats. Aizawa turned to her and said, "You're uninvited from lunch on Saturday. You can freeload on someone else's dime. Matter of fact, problem child, do you want her portion? I'm sure my husband will want to meet you, and that Kakuto is bound to cause chaos if we make him wait too long." Izuku grinned and said, "Sure. Why not? I might as well meet all of my guards now. It'll make it easier to get away later, that it should." Nimari gave Aizawa a horrified look. Power Loader is working on making you a phone since the UA network fries anything on the market after a few weeks. Should be done in a few hours. Izuku simply shrugged as he unplugged from the machine he had been using, allowing Aizawa to record the weight in his phone for later. "I'll send you a text later with the apartment number," complained Aizawa. "The endurance run and the 50-meter dash should be good places to start." "You hobo-looking blockhead. This boy hasn't been cleared for training yet. His medical records are in shambles, and what I have found makes me deeply concerned. What in the name of all things holy made you think this was acceptable?" An older woman with a cane shaped like a syringe stormed into the gym a few minutes later and used it to crack Aizawa across the shins. Izuku laughed. "I wasn't made aware I was on a medical hold. This is my fault, ma'am. I'm sorry. If you have the time, I would like to get this cleared up as soon as possible." "That it would." With a suspicious glance at the boy, the recovery girl said, "I do." "Come along, dearie." Izuku mouthed. "Fear the old warrior, doing a young warrior's job. They have survived this long for a reason." Izuku then bowed to the other two adults and dutifully followed the older nurse out of the gym. Aizawa simply kept massaging his shins while Nimari snorted, "Kid has good instincts. He figured out who the real apex is around here on their first meeting. That woman's hits were always the worst he's ever taken." For Izuku, the remainder of the week flew by, but for everyone else, it was a test of patience and rage. There was a lot of discussion among the other teachers regarding whether or not Izuku had been telling the truth following his encounter with Aizawa and Nimari in the gym. Furthermore, after giving the boy his physical, some third-year students reported discovering a recovery girl on her desk with an open bottle of whiskey. She was okay, and since even Nezu is aware that one should not mess with a white mage, no formal report was ever made. She is extremely strong and has control over your life. They also found another strange circumstance involving Izuku, who had a tendency to wander. Normally, this wouldn't be an issue, but he never followed a straight path. Although he would eventually arrive at his destination, he would pass through some unbelievable locations along the way. He once tried to ask a question by walking from his room to Nomori's. There is just one flight of stairs to climb, and the walk takes 3 minutes. It took him 2 hours, and during that time he visited Snipe's gun range and the support labs, which are on different sides of campus and require 3 hours of walking. One benefit of that adventure was that Izuku got to know Snipe and discovered that he uses woodworking as a hobby to unwind. To the confusion of the cowboy hero, Izuku naturally asked if he could commission 3 quirk-hardened Bakken. Much to the hero's surprise, Izuku was granted permission to receive said weapons following a conversation with Nezu over Snipe's phone. Snipe nodded, slightly impressed, as Izuku explained the details of what he was searching for. All 3 would take roughly 8 months to complete, but since the first was the simplest, it could be finished in 2. But now it was time to join Aizawa and his husband for lunch. Despite his best efforts to conceal it, Izuku had been anxious about this meeting. After all, who would want to wed a hobo who was frequently grumpy and harsh? It was decided that Aizawa would take Izuku to his apartment after his final excursion because, to be honest, they didn't want to learn that he had once more ended up having tea with Nezu in his office. For once, the cameras were powerless to help Nezu understand how Izuku got onto his couch. Izuku would disappear from one's range and then sporadically reappear on another. Nezu would have probably gone crazy trying to figure it out if he hadn't dismissed it as a strange quirk effect. Having said that, Aizawa and Izuku were strolling side by side when they came into an apartment that resembled Izuku's but had more cats. Izuku was supposed to be introduced to them by Aizawa, but the cats dispersed and wouldn't return as soon as he entered. Izuku heard sporadic whispering while he was sitting on the couch while Aizawa went to the kitchen to see how his husband was doing. "Hey there, little listener. My name's Hizashi Yam," he said with a smile as a man with long blonde hair in a bun emerged shortly after. However, he was interrupted when he saw Izuku emerge before him, his emerald eyes now ringed with gold, and his hand in a chop by his throat. "Hisashi Yamakawa, you have a lot of gall returning to Japan after what you did. What did you hear my dad was dead and think it was safe? Give me one reason why I shouldn't gut you like the snake you are," Izuku said, frowning after staring into Hizashi's eyes for a long time. Something tried to bind him up after Izuku felt his quirk cancelled, but he flexed and whatever it was tore like a cheap shirt, making the blonde man even paler. Izuku was then kicked in the sternum with a fairly powerful kick that knocked him back a step but left him standing. However, it succeeded in releasing his hold, and upon Izuku's recovery, his now completely emerald eyes discovered Aizawa standing defensively in front of the blonde with an angry expression. You had better have a good excuse for attacking my husband, problem child. Aizawa growled. Tell him, Uncle Hisashi. Tell him the truth. Izuku growled back, and Hisashi just stared at them both in complete confusion. Of course you play dumb. Let me guess, a Ponzi scheme. Or are you trying to earn enough trust to get a hold of all the teachers' bank account numbers? Well, I won't let you hurt Zawa-san. He might be a grump every now and then, but nobody deserves what you did to our family. Izuku sned after him. Hisashi kept concealing himself behind Aizawa. Little listener, I swear, I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Hisashi Yamada. I'm the hero present Mike. I don't want anyone's account numbers. I don't even know anyone going by Yamakawa. You have to believe me. Wait a minute, did you say Yamakawa? As in that asshole who embezzled a bunch of money about 20 years ago and ran off to the United States? That Yamakawa. Izuku nodded, but Aizawa froze. Kid, you got the wrong guy. Zashi is a blonde with straight hair. The guy you're talking about has black curls. Izuku laughed. Hair dye and a straightener. Any corner store could do the job. Aizawa sighed. Okay, logical. What can we do to prove he isn't who you think he is? Izuku reflected on it and sighed. Have him use his quirk. I remember Mom telling me Hisashi's fire breath was very distinct. Go ahead, uncle, expose yourself. I won't let you hurt anyone else I care about. Hisashi appeared uneasy, but Aizawa gave him a comforting nod. He turned to face one of the cups and made it explode with a tiny sonic yell. Izuku instantly froze, dropped to his knees, and bowed his head to the ground. With a moan, Aizawa said, Did you have to blow it up? I liked that cup. With a sigh, Hisashi turned to face the now shaking young man on his floor and said, You alright, little listener? Show, it was ugly. Get over it. Izuku was just grumbling, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have, but I did, and then, fuck. I'm so stupid. You invite me into your home and I attack you. I make wild allegations. I could have killed you. Maybe they were right. Maybe I am a monster, a tool only good for killing. Izuku was shocked to feel strange arms encircle him, but that turned out to be a bad idea. Izuku froze, then began to thrash himself loose. The next moment, the kid was gone and the balcony door was open, leaving both men perplexed, one of them wondering what he had done wrong. It took more than an hour for anyone to locate him, but when they did, Aizawa, Hisashi, and Nimari hurried to the building's roof. It was devastating what they discovered. Under the open sky, Izuku was curled up in a corner, sobbing and hugging himself. Aizawa was able to see Izuku for the first time since they had first met, a traumatized adolescent with numerous problems. He attempted to approach, but Izuku simply pleaded with him to back off, so he did. The three adults waited, each sitting a good distance away. They were confident that the child would eventually open up and provide them with some information. After approximately 15 minutes, Izuku began to cry. Hisashi was my mom's first love. They met in their second year of high school and, she really loved him. She completely devoted herself to him for a little over a year, but then she caught him cheating on her. It broke her heart, but his brother, my dad, he put her back together, and showed her what real love looked like. Izuku laughed as he said, Tetsuken was an amazing guy. His quirk wasn't conventionally heroic, but he didn't let that stop him. He became a police officer, and a damn good one too. When my uncle was discovered, my dad volunteered to catch him, but he failed, and people started whispering that he let him go. It was such bullshit. Nimari murmured, I think I remember an Officer Tetsuken, but I can't think of why. Izuku glanced at her with a lopsided smile. That's probably because he died like a hero. There was an incident, a collapse. The heroes in the area wanted to focus on the villain instead of securing the civilians. I saw the report when one of the suits tried to use it to convince me to do as I was told. My dad, he couldn't just stand idly by. He ran into that building, and saved a bunch of kids who got trapped. He sacrificed his life to save others. He was the reason I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to protect people, and make sure nobody has to leave their families behind like he did. My dad was my hero, but look at me now, I'm just like Hisashi. Nothing but a disgrace to his memory. The three adults were itching to give the teen a hug, but they didn't want to relive the previous incident. Nimari tilted her head in contemplation, saying, Oh sweetie, you know that's not true, but it also doesn't explain why you ran away. Izuku glanced away. Do you know what happens when someone is locked in a pitch-black room with soundproof walls for too long? After a while, it starts to feel like the walls are shifting. You start to hallucinate, see the faces of, Izuku took a deep breath, the faces of everyone I killed. I could feel the walls closing in on me. Meanwhile they just stared at me, judged me, reminded me of what I'd done. It was suffocating. Now, I get these feelings whenever I'm alone, a room is too crowded, or someone I don't know touches me. I feel like I'm back in that room. I have ways to mitigate it if I can catch it before it gets too bad, but earlier, I was just so overwhelmed. I needed to get out beneath the sky. I needed to remind myself that I'm not there. Hisashi froze, feeling self-conscious. Izuku running was actually his fault. Hisashi extended a hand and said, "Hey there listener, I'm Hisashi Yamada and the hero present Mike. I love my husband and all of my jobs, but most of all, I love helping hopefuls like you become great heroes. What do you say? 'Cause I really want to help you rock out." Izuku blinked in confusion, but Hisashi winked and said, "Well, I think we're even then." Izuku Midoriya, I'm not a hero yet, but I have a few names in mind. I really like training and getting stronger. I have trust issues, but, Izuku said as he slowly crawled over to take the blonde's outstretched hand. Hisashi grinned broadly and extended his arms. He felt a body crash into his a moment later, and as the children embraced, he started to gently stroke their heads. The teenager said a small, quiet, "Thank you," and Hisashi sighed to himself, "Yup, this is mine now. I can share, but this is my boy." The quartet then went to eat dinner outside the roof. After being fully informed about Izuku's predicament, Hisashi became even more determined to support Izuku's development. Hisashi, who struggled with self-control as a child, was personally offended by Izuku's treatment. Hisashi was no stranger to criticism. He had made his own parents go deaf not long after his quirk awoke, but this was something else entirely. Although his quirk hadn't been deadly at first, it might be now if he wasn't careful, and that fact alone created a bond between them that Izuku didn't have with Nimari or Aizawa. Following that day, the Yamazawas invited Izuku to sleep on their couch rather than by himself in his makeshift apartment. Yes, they did it on purpose as a joke. After that first night, Izuku came to the conclusion that it was important, despite his attempts to claim it wasn't. Knowing that the two adults were only a short stroll away and that Izuku wouldn't get lost if he needed their assistance was comforting, unlike when he was navigating the hallway. Hisashi's insistence on teaching him how to cook was another alteration. Shota came home with a gift for Izuku to use, a set of wood cooking knives, after initially just observing. Izuku ended up hugging both men because it was so nice. Inko and the Bakugas were allowed to visit in a few days since Izuku had settled in and Nezu thought he wouldn't try to flee right away. Nimari insisted on an online shopping binge to complete Izuku's eventual closet as part of the festivities. Izuku didn't mind the conditions Nezu had to set before transferring Izuku to his custody, including the fact that he couldn't leave campus and wouldn't be going to malls anytime soon. In any case, he didn't feel prepared for large crowds. Nimari found Izuku's sense of style intriguing. Izuku was all about comfort and space, but he did like boots, and his favorites were so big they almost looked like clown shoes. In this instance, fashion over function was acceptable because he was completely silent in any case. Beyond that, the same brand of incorrect branding, such as a shirt that said pants, or a pair of sweatpants with thong on the butt, was used for pajama pants, t-shirts, and zippered jackets. Nimari actually became stern after these were vetoed, saying, no nephew of hers was going to be a fashion disaster. Izuku eventually gave in, and not because it warmed his heart to hear her call him that. They decided on a number of cozy sweatpants and shorts, as well as some hoodies and muscle shirts. When she went to the restroom, he was free to sneak a present Mike hoodie and a pair of shorts with the Midnight brand, which had juicy on the butt and riding crops on either side, into the cart. Izuku was anxious when the big day finally arrived. What if his mother, aunt, and best friend detested him? He hadn't seen them in years. Seeing this, Shota went to pick up their guests while Nimari and Hisashi stayed with him in the room Nezu had reserved for the reunion. Izuku had selected gold joggers and a black long-sleeve compression shirt for the event. In addition, he decided to cover his cheek scar with a bandage and cover his hair with a hat. The adults were deeply saddened by what he was doing because they were aware of it. Izuku appeared to wish to conceal any reminder of what had transpired or the ordeal he had endured. They didn't like it, but they respected his wishes. When the two adults entered, Izuku was sitting on a couch with them on either side of him. There had been little change in Mitsuki Bakugo. Izuku saw that she was slightly more muscular, with well-defined arms and obvious abs, even though she still appeared 10 years younger than she actually was while walking with the grace of a model. She was by no means an Amazon, but she had a nice, robust, and healthy appearance. Now, Katsuki resembled his mother in every way, but his movements lacked the grace. He had an air of challenge and delinquency that was probably not entirely deliberate, and he was even more buffer than Mitsuki. But his mother was the one who changed the most. Inko appeared rounder in some places and thinner in others. Previously a reserved woman with a look that could compete with Mitsuki's, she was now older, more worn out, and obviously just as anxious as her son. As he stood, Izuku noticed that Inko had somewhat shrunk over time, a change that was exacerbated by his own development. For the first time in far too long, the two simply gazed at one another for a full minute before crashing into each other. Unaware that this was not a dream for either of them, Izuku brought his mother's head to his chest and buried his face in her hair, just as she did when the roles were reversed. After they finally parted ways, Katsuki took the initiative and struck Izuku in the face. It caught him off guard enough for Katsuki to grab him and give him a hug, even though it didn't hurt. "Don't you ever fucking leave us again," Katsuki muttered. "I'm sorry, Kachan. I missed you too," Izuku sniffed. Izuku was on the verge of crying again when Katsuki said, "You fucking better be, Izu-kun. Life isn't the same without my brother." Katsuki let go first and stomped over to a chair to wait. Only Mitsuki remained, and Izuku saw that she appeared apprehensive. Izuku started to move closer, but she stopped him with a hand, and he did, feeling the fear of rejection creep up his back again. That is, until an unexpected event occurred. "I'm so sorry. Everything you had to go through, was my fault. I trusted Masaru. I ignored the signs that something was wrong. I was such an idiot. I'm so sore," Mitsuki said, taking a steadying breath and bowing her head. Izuku cut her off as he embraced the woman who was slightly shorter in his arms. "It's okay, Auntie. I never blamed you, and it was never your fault. What happened that day, none of us were at fault. Thank you for looking after my mom when I couldn't. You protected the person most precious to me, and that is more important than anything else. I love you, and nothing can ever change that. I love you too, Izuku, and don't thank me for looking after her. She's done just as much for me as I have for her." "That's why," Mitsuki said, hugging him back while crying with gratitude. Then she froze, saying, "Shit. You don't know. Fuck. Izuku, I need you to sit down. There's a lot we need to catch you up on." Izuku would be lying if he didn't anticipate this, but something about Mitsuki's guilty expression unnerved him. She had always been unwaveringly self-assured and almost as fiery as Katsuki. He could dismiss her apology as an isolated incident, but this felt different. Izuku went back to the couch where he had begun, and Mitsuki sat down next to Inko on the couch across from him. He saw that they were holding hands in silent comfort. It appeared that the two adults alternated their explanations, with one taking over when the other was unable to go on. As it turned out, Masaru had struck a deal with some dubious individuals when the Baku brand first got started, and even though he was able to reimburse them, they still occasionally showed up and offered him more help. They always returned, but he had been wise enough to avoid them, knowing that the price would be more difficult to pay a second time. They had learned the truth after his death, but he had kept it a secret. Inko exhaled. "What happened at the museum shouldn't have happened, but we found out that guy who killed him." He threatened Masaru with exposing where the startup money came from. He strong-armed him into giving that moron information, but Masaru couldn't take it anymore. He tried to stop, to cut ties completely. Mitsuki replied. He started ducking calls and was on edge, but, like I said, I ignored the signs something was wrong. I wanted to believe that we didn't keep secrets, but, Kami, I was such an idiot. Izuku witnessed his mother squeeze Mitsuki's hand, and they exchanged a glance he had never seen before. It was soft and warm. Before he could ask, they went on to describe how his trial wasn't the only one that took place following the museum incident. Masaru left behind information that allowed All Might and a fedora-wearing detective to raid the rest of the guy's organization. After that, it turned into a yakuza that had been following them, and as soon as one group collapsed, the others fell like dominoes. It caused a great deal of turmoil, but the second great yakuza purge quickly came and went. The Baku brand was completely destroyed, but they got enough help to start over. The woman looked at Mitsuki and laughed. We decided to do it together, but the new Mito Baku brand wouldn't be like the old one. We started getting involved with charities and a number of reform groups. We exposed the red shoe policy that the only distributor of quirkless shoes had, and we revolutionized the field. Your mom's kind of a badass. She made it a point to reach out to a number of small groups that specialize in helping children with hard-to-control quirks, and she helped them unify. She became the face of a new initiative to give more support to kids with quirk activations like yours. It was hot. Inko blushed and gave Mitsuki a light, playful slap, missing the nauseated expression on Katsuki's face and the bewildered expression on Izuku's, but not Nomori's snort or laugh. Izuku nodded slowly, and Inko took a deep breath. Losing you, and Masaru to a lesser degree, it drove both of us into a lot of sleepless nights, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I started drinking. I don't want to make excuses or make it sound like I'm blaming anyone but myself, but, losing your father and you, it left me broken. Mitsuki looked pale, and Inko sighed, as if he realized what they had just done. As she recalled what she could, Mitsuki turned away and said, I wasn't much better, so one night we were working late and drinking far too much, and something, I don't know, clicked. You know better than anyone how amazing your mom is, and well, Mitsuki actually laughed a little bit toward the end. Katsuki yelled and growled, for fuck's sake. Just fucking say it, you two ended up having sex. No one in the fucking room is a child, hag. I don't know why you're both being so fucking hesitant. I was the one who had to find you two naked and hungover the next morning, so if anyone has a right to be uncomfortable, it's fucking me. Nomori's laughter turned into full-fledged cackles, and both women blushed. After a moment, he cleared his throat and stepped forward, attempting to appear unbiased but insistent. Okay, I doubt it was a one-time thing or you wouldn't have bothered admitting it. Also, yes, I'm aware of what sex is. One of the guards got high and thought it would be funny to force a particular patient into my cell a couple years ago. She had a fairly nasty quirk that caused her to sweat aphrodisiacs, ones she wasn't immune to. I'm pretty sure he intended for her to assault me, but it didn't happen. Aizawa gave him a severe, concerned look as the entire room froze in horror. Are you sure, problem child? She asked. Izuku sighed. Even under the effects of her quirk, she wasn't particularly strong physically. I have my dad's will, so I was able to not succumb to her sweat, but, Izuku glanced away, I did end up hugging her throughout that night. It wasn't sexual, I just realized that, since she couldn't turn it off, she probably hadn't been held that way since she was 4. I was right, she told me her story, and I'd like to think I helped her. She had lived a really messed up life, and as bad as that place was, it was probably safer for her there than out in the world. She said I gave her something important, but I don't think so. I didn't do anything special. I just treated her like a person and let her cry out her pain. Which I'm starting to realize might have been a bigger deal than I thought. Izuku looked back at Nimori and Hizashi with a smile at them. Although the other adults continued to look appalled, Mitsuki decided to finish their side before starting what would undoubtedly be an extremely tearful discussion about Izuku's side. So, after that night, we talked and we had joked about it back in middle and high school, but we tried being together. We went on dates for a few months, but that just made us realize we'd been kinda doing that sort of thing all our lives. Nothing felt different from all the little lunches we used to have or chats, and it made me realize I'd always been in love with your mom. I just never let myself accept it, because, well, why would such a loving gentle woman want an angry bitch like me? Inko genuinely glanced at Mitsuki and then don't forget dumb, because that's the only explanation I can come up with for how you can find anything of value in me. I'm old, I'm tired, and I've never been half as beautiful or strong as you, Mitsu. You deserve so much more than I can ever give you. You're all I want, and everything I'll ever need, Mitsuki said, tilting Inko's face and kissing her unexpectedly. Katsuki let out a sigh and Inko, yeah, so, we got married on paper a few years ago, but we refused to have a ceremony, not without you. We didn't want to have one if we couldn't have both of our sons there to share it with. I know it's probably a lot to take in, but are you happy? Do you make each other happy? Izuku asked, holding up a hand and giving them a stern look. The two women exchanged a look, grinned, and then nodded. So Izuku got up, went over, and gave them both a hug. Then I have no complaints. Izuku smiled as she stepped back and said, you've kind of always been my other mother, so this isn't that big of a change. Congratulations though, because I don't think many aunts can say they got promoted to official mom status. Just promise you'll protect her, and don't get too rough. Mom's never been the sturdiest, and I don't want her getting hurt. Before Mitsuki was able to respond, Katsuki, Izuku, I think you have it backwards. The walls back at the house are way too thin. Katsuki sighed, I've heard things that will haunt my nightmares for years. He gave Izuku an optimistic expression, I heard you have a room or something here, mind if I stay with you for a while? If I have to hear the hag beg her, Green Mistress, to go harder one more time, I might just crack and blow myself up. You know I don't beg, but I'm begging you, help a brother out. Izuku simply laughed, a lovely sound that his family had sorely missed, while Inko was a blushing mess and Mitsuki appeared ready to attack in her embarrassment. I think you said you were in charge, right? Do you think I could help my new brother out? Izuku asked, glancing at Aizawa. I'll talk to the rat. Can't make any promises until after that, but I'll try. Aizawa sighed deeply, and Katsuki's genuine gratitude caused the others to perspire. They had assumed he was kidding, but surely it couldn't be that bad. A knock on the door interrupted them, and when they opened it, they discovered a cart full of food. Everyone took a moment to eat after Aizawa pulled it inside and shut the door once more. While doing so, Katsuki grumbled, I've been trying to ignore it, but I can't. Why the fuck are you covering your cheek? Unless you got a new scar on top of the old one, it's not a big deal. I like scars. They should be worn with pride because they prove we survived the shit that made them. At least that's what I read. Katsuki then raised his arm to demonstrate a few marks on his forearm. I broke my arm a while back. Some extra thought they could shoot off their mouth about shit they know nothing about, and I broke their nose. Their buddy had a stone quirk. Tried to join in, but I blasted them away. Managed to punch me in the arm though. Katsuki laughed, kicked both of their asses, and I'd do it again. Nobody shit talks my nerd. Izuku turned his back and grumbled, I call bull. I don't doubt you kicked their asses, but you're too tough to break anything. Also, you're trying to convince me you read now. I'll believe it when I see it. With a sigh, Katsuki grabbed at the bandage on Izuku's cheek and tackled him. After a while of rolling around, Katsuki leapt back with his prize in hand, only to discover Izuku with his hand covering his face and his eyes glaring. Katsuki became deflated and turned away. That's fucking better. We know you went through some shit, but we don't want you to feel like you have to hide it. We're not fucking kids anymore. We're about to try out for high school. We can handle it, so fucking let us in. You're my brother now, shitty nerd, and that means you're stuck with me, highs and lows. Anything you can endure, I can too, so. Izuku's family was taken aback by his outburst and saw that he began scratching at his chest, where they knew his other scar was located. Shut the fuck up, Katsuki. You have no idea what you're talking about, so respectfully, back the fuck off. Mitsuki repelled Inko's attempt to approach by shaking her head and telling her that the moment was not right. I see you grew a spine as well. Good. Now stop being a bitch, and let it out. You think I don't understand? Then fucking clear it up for me, Katsuki growled as he tossed the bandage aside. Until you do, I'm going to keep coming at you. You were my best friend and I failed you. I refuse to fucking fail at being your brother too. Now fucking tell me, Katsuki glared at Izuku. Izuku glared back, then his face twitched and he spun around. Katsuki was about to shout out another challenge when he heard Izuku begin to whisper, I learned about scars too, Kachin. There was this guy, must have been pushing 80, but he was a brick shit house. I made a deal with the other patients that I wouldn't hurt anyone if they helped teach me, since I wasn't allowed out of my cell, and the guards kept trying to get me beaten up. He was the only one who insisted on doing both. He taught me stuff, but he also beat the shit out of me for a while, until I got good enough to fight back. Izuku began to remove his shirt, saying, he taught me scars on a warrior's back were shameful, proof of cowardice or a weak will. When he finished, they saw a completely untouched back without a single scratch, bruise, or scar. The bastard was blind, but he saw better than anyone I've ever met. Oh, Izu, what did they do to you? Mitsuki's face fell as Izuku began to turn and Inko gasped. Ignoring them both, Izuku said, are you satisfied now? Is seeing this enough? I never doubted your strength, Katsuki, but I know you couldn't have survived what I went through, not without being changed, 'cause I was. He spread his arms to reveal no scars. Izuku touched his cheek and said, and this is the one I hate most. It doomed me. It marks me as the monster I was that day, and unlike the others, it can't be hidden. Izuku described each scar and its story, but all of the others ended with, "But I kept moving forward." Izuku said, "I'm not the biggest fan of most of them. They are only reminders of pain, this one." The adults cringed at every story, but Katsuki never gave up or turned away. "You definitely have more than me, but..." Katsuki frowned after Izuku finished, taking off his own shirt to expose 3. "A girl jumped me on my way home. Didn't even tell me why, but given the fact she smiled before running away, I'm guessing it wasn't my sparkling personality that caused it. It didn't matter and I kept moving forward too." He pointed to a starburst on his shoulder and said, "A fire extra said you were nothing but a villain, and as your brother, I was one too, but I kept moving forward too." After that, he pointed to a Lichtenberg pattern on his opposite pec, followed by the words, "Some lightning extra trying to take revenge for her brother, but I kept moving forward too." Katsuki looked down at Izuku and asked, "Do you know the difference between our scars?" Izuku averted his gaze and said, "None of yours are your fault. Mine are." Katsuki grumbled, "No, the difference is, I love my scars. Every one of them is a moment I'm proud of. I stood up for myself, my family, and my beliefs. You were never a villain, and it's time the world saw that. We made a promise to become heroes. Are you backing out now or will you continue moving forward with me?" "I didn't need the reminder, Kachin. I signed a contract that ensures I have to stay at UA for at least the next 4 years. As fun as general studies sounds, I'm not built for letting someone else fight my battles, so the question becomes, are you ready to be stuck in second place?" "'Cause I'm going to fight my way to the top," Izuku said as he moved forward and gave Katsuki another firm but dry hug. "Then get ready to lose because I'm going to be number 1, scoffed Katsuki. Nimari murmured, "Not that I'm not loving the energy, and seeing 2 very toned young men shirtless is definitely my idea of time well spent. You should probably get dressed again." Both boys quickly put their shirts back on after turning away. They then talked about the specifics of the contract Izuku had already signed as well as what would happen going forward. Upon reviewing it, both mothers appeared dissatisfied, but they couldn't hold him responsible. In other words, Izuku received all of UA's protections and their full support at the expense of his rights, things he didn't really have anyhow. It would ensure that he could not be forcibly removed from campus and that, while on campus, he was essentially untouchable by anyone who wasn't employed by UA. At one point, when Nezu called to check in, Aizawa moved aside, and Katsuki obtained authorization to stay the night with Izuku on the grounds that she needed to make sure Izuku was being properly cared for. When the mothers eventually had to depart, Izuku grinned and both of them gave the boys hugs. That's why he waited. He was foolish to ever believe that they would despise him. Izuku blinked upon seeing a motorcycle with a sidecar when they arrived at the parking garage. Furthermore, it wasn't Mitsuki's. The adults cautioned Katsuki not to let Izuku leave his sight after they departed, lest he actually wander off. They soon found themselves alone in Izuku's apartment after Katsuki rolled his eyes. Izuku simply shrugged and acknowledged that it was only temporary, but Katsuki appeared unimpressed. After they came up with a plan for dinner, Izuku offered to let Katsuki take a shower first. Katsuki almost had a heart attack when he saw Izuku preparing dinner with a knife, but Izuku simply laughed and clarified that only steel blades caused him to lose control. In fact, glass or wood worked just fine. Izuku acknowledged that he considered purchasing an obsidian sword while chopping vegetables, but ultimately decided against it. It was too easily broken or sheared to be useful. Katsuki regarded his curry suspiciously before reluctantly biting into it. It was good, much to his surprise. It was a little less flavorful than he usually liked, but he could only expect so much in the absence of his mother's unique spice blend. Following that, the two spent several hours getting back in touch and discovered that not much had changed between them. It was actually easier to talk because Izuku was now as loud and determined as Katsuki. It seemed as though their previous relationship held the secret, and now they were like open doors to one another. They are completely open and unobstructed. Izuku offered Katsuki the bed when it was time to go to sleep. He acknowledged that it kept him awake at night. He felt more at ease with his back to a corner because it was too soft and he hadn't eaten in a long time. Katsuki gave in, deciding that this was a problem for another day, but neither boy made much progress. They didn't want to be apart now that they were back together. With a picture of them together attached, Katsuki texted their mothers to wish them a good night. They got a few replies in return. Katsuki texted back right away, but he kept their conversation a secret from Izuku. After finishing that, the two boys went to bed. Katsuki forced himself to remain awake until Izuku fell asleep. After he was, Katsuki promised himself he would get better and sent a second photo of him dozing. He would never fail to keep his younger brother safe. As his alarm went off, Izuku frowned. He stood up, stretched, folded his blanket, and placed it back in the bin beneath one of his chairs. He still liked to sleep in the balcony corner with his back to the wall and one of his bakken in hand, even in his semi-permanent apartment. Izuku showered and changed into his daily attire. He didn't want to call them handlers because they were so much more than those stiff bastards had been when he was little, but friends also didn't feel tight in comparison to his forest green hoodie, gold hakama pants, and black compression shirt, to which he had become fairly attached. In any case, he adored the hoodie that Zashi, Nem, and Zawa had given him for his first birthday since the museum. He cherished it nearly as much as the bakken that was on the bed right now. Although it wasn't particularly well made, it had a unique weight. His mother had given it to him as a sign that they supported and accepted him. Apparently owned by his mother in middle school before she calmed down and became the mother he knew, it was made of ordinary biwa wood. He wouldn't have believed it if MIT mom hadn't sneaked in a photo of his mother with the same bakken and in a school uniform. After blushing at the photo, Inko asked to borrow the sword one last time before pursuing her wife in what Izuku saw as an extremely impressive form. Returning to the present, Izuku prepared a substantial breakfast for himself and completed getting dressed. He had discovered over the months that he liked to cook. It was similar to meditation in its own right, with the added bonus of being able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. He thought about the best bakken to bring as he put on his red boots. For the entrance exam, he was allowed to bring one, but which one? Izuku grinned and fastened his biwa blade to his hip, even though his trio of redwood, black elm, and white oak was designed especially to withstand his strength and the rigors of his quirk. The assurance this one had was more valuable than any small boost, and he wouldn't have to go all out today. Izuku left and began to wander until he came to a tree with shade, where he sat back to get ready for what was about to happen. He used to warm up by going to one of the gyms, but until Power Loader fixed the crusher and found a way to deal with pushing Izuku further, he was prohibited. Rather, he engaged in some image training while alerting himself to potential threats. He didn't fall asleep for about 30 minutes, thank you, but a girl with long, blue hair that fell in spirals woke him up. Hey ya, since I don't recognize you, I'm guessing you're here for the exam. You're a bit early though. How did you get in? What's your name? What's your quirk? Oh, she said, waving and grinning kindly as she walked up to him. Izuku raised his hand. Kind of, maybe, I live here, Izuku Midoriya, and Steel Soul. How about you? Are you here for the exam too? The girl froze, then began to bounce with excitement, saying, you actually answered all of my questions. Nobody does that, we have to be friends. Nope, I'm about to start my 3rd year. Just here to help guide the newbies to their test rooms. Izuku laughed. Well, I'm not against it, that I'm not, but it would be easier if I knew your name. Nejire reddened and said, oh, wow. She gave herself a silly head bump and protruded her tongue, saying, I'm Nejire Hado, sorry about getting ahead of myself. Izuku shifted to move his bakken from his lap to his shoulder and tapped the ground beside him. It's fine, you seem like the high-energy type. I used to be much the same, so I understand having 1,001 questions constantly bounding around inside your head and struggling to get out. Let me show you something. It's a meditation technique I came up with to help me focus and slow my brain a bit. Looking between Izuku and the sword, Nejire tilted her head and said, wouldn't that slow my reaction time down? My teachers always said my mind was an advantage. Kept me constantly observant, or something like that. Izuku laughed and said, sure, but it also breeds indecision. Something that could get someone killed. This is simply forcing non-urgent thoughts into a line so you can address them one at a time, while allowing important thoughts, like someone attacking you, to jump the line and take prominence. Nejire complied with his instructions, nodding and taking a seat next to him. She had previously attempted meditation, but it had never been successful. However, this felt different because she wasn't isolating herself from the outside world and causing her mind to become a pressure cooker. This involved opening herself up, allowing her thoughts to flow, and gradually guiding them into a manageable row. It was wonderful, and since she had more space to think, her mind began to connect the dots on its own. She asked herself, Midoriya-kun, why do you have a sword? Because one question kept coming to mind and she had answers for it already. Izuku leaned forward and grinned. This is hope. I actually have 3 other wooden swords, but I was only allowed to bring 1 for the exam since my quirks related to my swordsmanship. Normally I'd use 3 but that would be overkill, and my joke about there being no kill like overkill fell flat with my boss. Your boss? Nejire asked, tilting her head. Nezu, Izuku explained. Technically we're allies, but since he holds all the power unless I fight back and start cutting people, he's the boss. If you'd asked me a year ago if I would be okay with this setup I would have laughed at you, but I like Nezu. He's respectful and doesn't press me to do anything I'm not comfortable with. It's refreshing. That's so cool. Do your other swords have names too? Nejire bounced. Izuku grinned. Yup. Faith, Resolve, and Truth, they are actually my main blades, but for today I thought Hope was a better fit. Unlike her sisters, Hope is just a normal Bakken, but she carries the support of my family, and that alone is worth having her by my side today. Nejire was beaming. Oh, that's super cute, and really practical, I guess. What makes the others special though? A short child with purple ball-like hair fled in terror as Izuku drew Hope and slashed the air, cutting a rock a few dozen feet away in half. Izuku had just resheathed his blade. The other 3 are each made from special wood and processed to imitate quirk effects. Faith, made of white oak, can absorb light and release it. Resolve, made of black elm, is her twin, but she rejects light and creates slashes that seem to be made of darkness. Truth, made of redwood, is the most complex. She feeds on my bloodlust to get sharper, and because of that she is always the first drawn and the last resheathed. You said that Hope was a normal blade. How did you do that? Nejire asked, blinking. Izuku returned to his seat. That was a one-sword technique I learned to deal with villains beyond my reach. I call it air cutter, and that's exactly what it does. I cut the molecules in the air creating a pressure wave. The wave then travels in a straight line until it is stopped or runs out of energy cutting anything in the way. I could have cut that kid too, but not in the mood for explaining blood this early. I'm not the biggest fan of people after all. But aren't I? People. Nejire pointed to herself after blinking once more. They both laughed as Izuku closed an eye and protruded his tongue, saying, Nope. You're a friend. Different species completely. They mostly just hung out and took in the atmosphere, though Nejire did ask a few more superficial questions about things like music and foods he liked. Eventually, she had to leave to do her work, but instead of leaving, she used her quirk to gracefully push off the ground and take off. Izuku laughed at that. Nejire was strange, but in a positive way. Izuku got up and started walking to the check-in station after a little more time. Excuse me, but you're going the wrong way for the exams. She pointed behind him and said, It's this way. The brunette girl with pink rosy cheeks stopped him on his way and scowled. Please tell me you're not trying to run away before you even try. She said. Izuku raised his eyebrows. No, I'm here for the exams. Are you sure it's that way? Damn it, I could have sworn it was this way. No, don't you see all the other people heading this way? The girl said, blinking. Izuku shrugged and said, I saw, but not my fault if they get lost. He then started to go in the wrong direction, but the girl stopped him once more. I'm Uraraka Ochako, why don't you let me guide you? The girl said, snickering at the circumstance and reaching out to embrace him. Sighing, Izuku joined them in arms and said, If you insist. First my Aunt Nem and now you. I don't know why the pretty ones refuse to trust that I know where I'm going. Ochako's face flushed, but Izuku didn't notice it until she tripped over an uneven brick and he caught her without thinking, causing the blush to almost explode. That is, until she froze when she saw the wooden sword resting on his hip. Izuku sighed in defeat as Ochako took a closer look at him, blinked in terror, and fled. Izuku walked inside, following the throng that now surrounded him, and checked in with a beaming Nejire who showed him to room 2. He felt a hand land on his shoulder as he began to walk in the wrong direction once more, and the person on the other end was an already irate Katsuki. He got directions to room 4 for himself and then led his mischievous younger brother to his test room, receiving a lot of looks in the process. Izuku simply strolled to a seat and settled in after being pushed into his test room. Took you a while, nerd. The fuck's up with that? Izuku asked Katsuki as he was leaving after finishing the written exam an hour later. Izuku laughed. I took my time, that I did. I had plenty after all. No need to rush and make a stupid error that didn't need to happen. I don't want you beating me without actually beating me, that I don't. So in short, you decided to be lazy and take your time, Katsuki moaned. You wound me, Kat Neeson. How could my own brother think so lowly of me? Izuku clenched his chest. You're a fucking dork, you know that, huffed Katsuki. Izuku chuckled and protruded his tongue, saying, but I'm your dork, that I am. Katsuki sighed and grasped his collar, that you are. Fuck, now you've got me doing it. Arg, let's just fucking get moving. We have a practical to take and then you owe me lunch for having to deal with your dumb ass. You still got some of the hag's murder sauce, right? Izuku laughed. Oh course. Stuff works great to strip paint and rust on top of being tasty by the way. Katsuki grinned. Be happy she gave you the mild stuff. The actual hot stuff, well I saw it eat through a metal spoon once that got left in it for a few minutes. Mom might be a better cook, but the hag knows her spice. After walking down the hall, the two arrived at a sizable lecture hall. Izuku had beef, but he also had a lot of seafood left over from his surf and turf tests, so he offered that as an alternative. They sat together and talked about what they wanted to do after the test and what kind of curry Katsuki wanted. The idea of spicy shrimp and scallop curry actually made Katsuki's mouth water, but that's when the useful explanation started. Present Mike approached the front in his magnificent leather outfit. His directional speakers primed and his hair gelled into its tall state. Izuku laughed when he tried to excite the applicants in his best DJ voice but received no response. Zashi's fans adored him because he was so a try-hard. He then began the actual explanation, outlining what to anticipate and warning that none of the pointed robot's weapons are meant to deal deadly damage, despite how painful they may be. He continued by cautioning that while debris was still a threat, nobody should be in danger unless they were extremely unlucky. He then sent them to each of their test sites, reminding them that any attempt to attack another participant is grounds for instant failure. After realizing that they were in different locations, Katsuki groaned and turned to look around when he saw a girl with a raven-like head going to the same test location as Izuku. Before she could agree or even speak, Katsuki stomped up to her and snarled, "Hey, you, I need you to escort my moron to the test site. He's impressively stupid when it comes to directions, and I don't want him getting lost again." He pushed Izuku in her direction and stomped off. Izuku sighed as he watched Katsuki stomp away and turned to apologize to whoever had shoved him, but before he could say anything, his voice caught in his throat and his mouth went dry. He thought the girl in front of him was beautiful. Her dark purple sleeveless t-shirt and gym shorts might have seemed uninteresting to others, and her bird's head might not have been considered conventionally attractive, but to him, she was everything. He could tell she was fit, but not bulky, and her tee did little to cover up her curves. Lithe and strong, and he thought her bird-like face made her look special and memorable. Call him a pervert if you will. Your friend is kinda forceful, isn't he? Izuku couldn't speak, so he just nodded, making the girl laugh. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue. Izuku looked away, feeling extremely embarrassed, but that only made the girl sigh. Well, I guess we're going to the same place, so I don't mind walking with you. My name is Yumiko Tokiyami. It's nice to meet you. Izuku blushed and muttered, even her name is pretty, that it is. I apologize. Did you say something? I didn't catch that, Yumiko said, tilting her head. I'm Izudoriya Midiku. I mean Izuku Midoriya. Ugh, that was so lame. How could I flub my own name? Izuku said after taking a deep breath. Yumiko simply chuckled and said, it's nice to meet you, Midoriya-san, and don't worry about it. I'm a little nervous too. She then asked, who was that loud blonde anyway? No offense, but he seems a little rude. Izuku's heart was pounding. Izuku moaned as they made their way to the bus that would transport them to their test site. That's Katsuki for you. He's actually my older brother. Our moms have been best friends for a long time, and a few years back they decided to screw it, and just got married. From what I've seen, they've never been happier, and under all that anger and rudeness, Katsuki is actually a great guy, that he is. I couldn't ask for a better brother. Yumiko heard a few strange things, but she didn't follow up. Rather, she simply nodded and said, I understand how you feel. My brother is much the same. They stopped talking as they boarded the bus, and Izuku offered Yumiko the window seat, but she simply shook her head, so he took it. He'd like to meet you apparently, she said, groaning and giving Izuku a pitying glance. Name's Fumikage. I'm Yumi's older brother, and I've got my eye on you. You reek of blood and death, and I don't like it. Don't get any bright ideas, or you'll find yourself skewered on my claws. I won't let anyone hurt my Yumi. Am I clear? Izuku asked, bewildered, but a moment later a shadow with red eyes and a bird-like head emerged from Yumiko's midriff and crossed its arms in judgment. Izuku glanced at Fumikage and then bowed his disbelief. I understand, Tokiyami-san, and you have every right to be suspicious of my intentions, that you do. If I had a beautiful little sister I would probably be just as defensive, so let me be clear, I have every intention to not hurt your sister. I would certainly like to be friends, but I don't see that happening. Yumiko was somewhat moved by this and wondered what she had done wrong. He continued, she is so wildly out of my league it's comical. Nobody as kind and pretty as her should want anything to do with someone like me, so I hold no ill feelings. I know she'll walk away after this meeting, and not look back, as sad as that makes me, I'll accept it, because I would only hold her back, that I would. In fact, Fumikage appeared incapable of comprehending what had just transpired. It felt wrong that the boy, who had been staring at his sister with heart-shaped eyes, was giving up without a fight. He couldn't understand why the teen in front of him seemed to roll over without a fight, and he simply retreated back into Yumiko because everything he sensed about him exuded danger, resolve, and confidence. After accepting the win, he would take some time to process what had transpired. Yumiko, on the other hand, pouted, what if I don't want to walk away? What if I want to be your friend too? What do you have to say to that? She was flattered by the compliments but also furious at Izuku's contempt for his own value. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief and glanced. Then I would call you a fool, pretty bird, because you have no idea who I am. I don't deserve your friendship, that I don't, and being near me will only cause you strife in the long run. Yumiko's scowl turned into a pout. How dare you? Who I am friends with should be my choice. If you don't like me, just say that. You wouldn't be the first person to call me a freak or reject me. She saw a flash of gold in Izuku's emerald eyes as his head snapped toward her, and she was truly terrified. Izuku grabbed her hand and gave her a serious look before she could respond. I want names. Who dared to say such vile things to you? Anyone who would reject you must be truly moronic. Please don't listen to idiots. You are amazing and perfect just the way you are, yes indeed. When Yumiko said, then why are you pushing me away before we can even really get to know each other? If I'm so great, why won't you let me get to know you? Her feathers actually puffed up a little, and she turned her head away. Izuku returned her gaze and exhaled deeply. There are things worse than being rejected by a stranger. Consider for a moment, if you will, I open up and you find out exactly who I am, only for you to recoil and reject me then. It would hurt so much more and cut so much deeper. I can bear the slings and arrows of people I don't know, because they don't matter, but being rejected after opening up, that is a darkness I dare not enter, for it is one that will consume me without question, that it will. When the bus stopped and everyone began to get off, Yumiko sat motionless as he thought about what he had said. He slipped over the seat in front of them and got off the bus without bothering her, but she was so absorbed that she didn't even notice it. Despite her disorganized thoughts, she was certain that she was far from finished with Izuku Midoriya. Izuku made his way to the lockers outside the test city, navigating the throng of applicants. They were obviously used for any student belongings prior to entering for urban training, but now they served as little more than lockers for the few applicants who needed to store their house keys or shed a layer of clothing. Izuku took a deep breath, removed the hoodie, and took out the red bandana he had concealed in the pouch. After finishing that, he moved to a good location with easy access to the entry gates and began to warm up and stretch his muscles, releasing a tiny bit of bloodlust as he did so. Izuku was distracted when a boy who looked like a mantis approached and shoved him. He growled in a whisper, "How dare you show your face here? Murderer! Villain! I'm going to crush you like the insect you are." A look of disgust and condescension was already on the boy's face as he power-walked toward them, and he almost missed the stiff boy with the spiky blue hair in the crowd. "How dare you bring a weapon to this prestigious event? This is a clear violation of the rules. What is your name? I must find a proctor. This kind of blatant cheating and disrespect for the rules and common decency must not stand," exclaimed the blue-haired boy as he got in Izuku's face and began chopping the air violently like a malfunctioning spastic robot. "Desist immediately. You were disturbed the other applicants and..." They were getting a lot of attention and stares because of the boy's loud performance, but only two sets truly bothered Izuku. The brunette from earlier, who still appeared utterly terrified, and Yumiko, who was approaching quickly. Izuku really didn't want the lovely bird girl to ask him any more questions, even though he wanted to confront the jerk in front of him. Inquiries that could disclose his identity and actions. Inquiries that would ultimately make her stare at him with the disgust he knew was coming. When Izuku saw the gates slide open, he smiled and felt a wave of relief before vanishing as he ran through the gates, which had just opened enough to let people in. In response to Present Mike's voice coming over the speakers, several applicants sputtered or laughed over him, jumping the gun, and disqualifying himself. What are you waiting for? And not countdowns or go signals in real life. Go or there won't be any points left. That first applicant already has 23 points. The other applicants paled and started to flood in, only to find precisely sliced up robots and devastation. Izuku pulled out his sword and tied his bandana around his head as he stepped into the test area. He let himself fall into his battle meditation since no one could see the transparent ring of gold that now surrounded his emerald pupils. He was no longer a completely restrained or mindless slayer. Instead, he was a focused warrior with all of his senses on edge as he ran ready to strike, his quirk providing him with techniques when the need arose. Avoiding the opening fire of 3 one-point robots with practiced ease, he started slashing without thinking, cutting steel and wire with the same ease as if his hand were running through water. In order to decapitate 2 two-point robots, he twisted his body, cut through the body of a big 3-point robot, and then used its husk to kick off. His first encounter ended in a matter of seconds, and he was awarded 8 points. However, he continued to move. He was a prowling hunter with a ton of more prey to seize. Izuku tried everything, but his conscious mind began to tunnel. His perception did become somewhat limited as he cut, slashed, stabbed, and bounced off walls, defeated robots, and any other obstacles that stood in his way, but he would never let his meditation fall into a complete trance. Before his vanquished targets could even crumble at their feet, he appeared to the other candidates as a streak that came and went. 3 incoming third-year students and the UA teachers watched the various screens of the test sites and the applicants on display up in the observation room. 2 of the 3 students were observing a noticeable shift in the third. Najire, their friend who was a toddler on a sugar rush and a perpetually unfocused ball of energy, was calm. Her analytical eyes were sharper and more concentrated than they had ever seen. This was different, even though they were the students closest to the professional level and the new Big 3. It was widely believed that Mirio Tagata, their leader, was the tall, heavy boy with the blonde hair and big smile. Despite being the most physically fit of the 3, he had the lowest academic standing due to spending more time in the gym than in the library, but he was still at the top of his class. Not as intelligent or strong as either of his friends, but more balanced than both, Tamaki Amajiki acted as a mediator between them. He might have surpassed them if it weren't for his anxious nature, but instead he decided to stay in their shadow and help his closest friends. Najire Hado, on the other hand, was incredibly smart and, after years of training, just as strong as Mirio. However, because of her flighty personality, she was never able to prevail. When Najire's closest friends got together with her following the check-in, she had appeared different, but they hadn't really thought about it. They were unable to ignore it any longer, but before they could question her, they noticed her smiling while observing a boy, who was brandishing a sword. Nothing seemed right about that. Are you kidding me, Principal? First you let that monster onto our grounds, then approve his application, and now you allow him to further break our rules and bring a weapon. This is getting obscene. What's next? Do you intend to have him start teaching our students to kill villains that get in his way, or, said one of the teachers, a large man with noticeable fangs and visible scars. Shut up. Najire was positively glowing with anger and disappointment as everyone turned to see her scowling at Vlad King, one of the teachers she usually got along well with. She came towards him and poked him in the forehead. Don't you talk about Izu like that. He's a great guy and incredibly nice. The test isn't even over yet, and I can already tell he has enough points to pass. That makes him my Kahai, and I will not have him talked about like a villain behind his back. You're better than that, we are better than that, and I thought you knew that, or have you forgotten all the stories you told us about how you were looked at when you started out? Is one of my favorite teachers nothing but a hypocrite? Vlad's face turned scarlet with anger, but before he could scream back, he noticed that Kayama, Yamada, and Aizawa were all wearing the same dark, irate expression, and he realized that he was losing this argument. He turned away, stomped, and complained as he went to a corner of the room to concentrate on the other applicants rather than trying his luck. Nimuri exhaled. Don't worry Hado-kun, we'll talk to him later. I should have expected something like this when he was the only member of staff to actively avoid the kid. To get the group's attention, a blind man with a skeletal appearance raised his hand and said, I'm a bit lost. Why is Kon-san so angry? Who is that kid anyway? The big three and Toshinori nodded. Tsunezu explained, most of you know the situation already, but for the rest of you, none of this leaves this room. Nezu sighed. As he did, Nejire simply grew more depressed, while Toshinori's expression of utter terror intensified. Nejire was crying when Nezu finished, and Toshinori stood sternly and said, I know I won't make any friends saying it, but I can see Kon-san's point. This prompted a barrage of angry or disappointed looks at him, but he went on, saying, clearly you've put a lot of trust and investment into this boy, and I don't see why. I will be the first to agree that everyone should get a chance to learn and grow, but this seems like less reaching a hand out in support and overreaching for a purpose. He killed people, and by your own admission he feels no remorse for doing so. That is a problem and a clear sign he is not heroic potential. Toshinori shook his head, saying, I can't help but be against this. What guarantee do we have that he won't choose to do so again? Okay, that's weird. I thought he was supposed to be in Site B. Why is he now in E, and why did I see him in C a minute ago? Miro said, pointing to a screen as the room appeared to be about to descend into civil war. As he had stated, everyone turned to see Izuku speeding through Site E, which was more than an hour away from Site B, where he had begun. Given that the practical was only 20 minutes long, this shouldn't have been possible. Before freezing at something protruding from some debris, the teachers watched as Izuku used his Bakken to cut some missiles out of the air to protect a group of other applicants. A few teachers appeared uneasy, but neither Nezu nor Aizawa did. It was a long, straight length of rebar that ended up in Izuku's other hand after a quick slice. Aizawa began to sob. Calm down. He wouldn't lose control over a piece of rebar. It was actually on the list of things we tested. Butter knives are forbidden, but metal forks and spoons are fine. It seems he can handle blunt metal objects just fine. They don't seem to count unless they're blade-shaped as well, also keys for some reason, but those are short, so unless someone creates a giant key, it shouldn't matter. Returning to the monitors, they witnessed a change in Izuku's style as he actually accelerated and resembled a tornado made of blades. They were shocked to learn that Izuku could cut with the rebar as cleanly as he could with the Bakken. Nezu shrugged and said, we met this morning. We talked, and he showed me his technique. I think that's how he's doing that. As they continued to stare at her in confusion, she explained what he had told her, and the science department teachers all yelled, bullshit, which prompted a narrow-eyed glare from Nezu. The teachers were confused when Izuku switched sites once more to Site A while they were preoccupied. It was illogical. Although it was noted that he was obviously breaking the rules by jumping sites, they decided it shouldn't be taken into account in this particular instance. Ultimately, based on their observations of Izuku's wanderings, this was typical, and they seriously doubted that he even realized what he was doing. As the exam's conclusion drew near, Nezu put an end to the conversation and carried out his favorite test-taking task, pressing the large red button. Izuku was cutting through 3 more 2-point robots when he felt the ground tremble and heard a disturbance. A huge robot with a large painted 0 on it got up and started to stutter through the city. He heard a scream and the sound of falling debris, but then he felt his heart rate increase and his quirk seemed to flare to even greater heights, as if it was hungry to challenge this new threat. He hurried to investigate and discovered a startled Yumiko working with Fumikage to try to save someone while frantically excavating a pile of debris. He could see the 0 coming quickly over his shoulder, headed straight for Yumiko and whoever was buried there. They would never succeed. With the 0 moving at its current speed, neither Yumiko nor the shadow were strong enough to free the buried person and then flee. With a roar of Nagiri, Izuku launched his first attack, charging toward the 0 and pointing both of his scissors to the right. The 0 was forced to stop when its right leg broke apart a moment later, but Izuku wasn't finished. As he shifted his grip on both blades and ran up the falling robot, his eyes briefly flashed gold. He repeatedly slashed and growled out, Eclipse Rush, creating barely perceptible specks of light and darkness that cut deep into the 0, causing any working mechanisms to seize up. He charged past the now completely destroyed head of the junk heap with one last cross slash and saw the lights inside go out. He threw away the now broken rebar and put his blade back in its sheath before he staggered forward and fell off the robot as it struck the floor. Izuku continued to stagger as he approached a shell-shocked Yumiko and Uraraka, who had been released from her concrete prison. All traces of the gold vanished as he collapsed to his knees in exhaustion and took deep breaths to calm himself after making sure they were all right. He almost passed out when he heard the girls get closer than he actually saw them. Without faith and resolve, he had forgotten how draining his Eclipse series of techniques was, but it had been worthwhile, as long as neither girl was harmed. Because he was still wearing his bandana, he was able to see it when Yumiko attempted to approach an Uraraka, who was still only staring at him fearfully, grabbed her arm. As Yumiko gave her a perplexed and annoyed look, Uraraka simply stumbled, "Don't get too close." That's him, that's the Musudafu slasher. I will never forget that day, or the sound of men begging for their lives. Izuku began to faint as he realized that she had been in the museum that day, which was why she had been so afraid. The knowledge that she had witnessed at least some of his actions struck him like a ton of bricks to the chest. He didn't see Yumiko pull away and run to catch him before his head hit the ground, or how she held his head and wished she had been stronger, because he was out before he hit the ground.
So this was it for this series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.